making a list of some of the deadliest days in American history, your mind would jump to Gettysburg, Antietam, Pearl Harbor, 9/11. You can now add to that somber list last Thursday, last Wednesday, last Tuesday, last Friday, and yesterday. Each day, nearly 2,500 Americans or more lost their lives to COVID in the course of a single day. Now, time is running out for Congress to finish our most pressing priority, passing an emergency COVID relief bill to help American families in need. Right now, there is one clear path to getting an outcome: a bipartisan group of senators and House members who have reached an initial agreement on another emergency relief bill. In the spirit of compromise and for the sake of getting something done for the American people, Speaker Pelosi and I have endorsed those efforts as a framework for a final bill. Everyone knows that this bipartisan proposal is the only real game in town at the moment, the only proposal with enough bipartisan support to hopefully pass both houses of Congress before the end of the year. Everyone knows that, it seems, except Leader McConnell, who continues to stand in the way of bipartisan progress, and who seems to wake up each morning with a new round of outlandish reasons why Democrats are somehow to blame for all the world's ills. As the bipartisan group of senators continues to work toward a final agreement, I want to address an incredibly false equivalency that has been drawn between two provisions: providing aid to state and local services, essential state and local services, and granting sweeping immunity to corporations who put their workers in harm's way during the pandemic. You'll hear voices say Democrats want to fund state and local services, while Republicans, that is Leader McConnell, want a corporate liability shield. Each side wants something that the other side doesn't want to accept. But as I said, this is a false equivalency, incredibly false, for two reasons. First, state and local aid has broad bipartisan support, totally unlike the Republican leader's liability provision, which is expressly partisan. Let me say that again because it's important. There is strong bipartisan support for state and local aid. There is not the same broad bipartisan support for sweeping corporate immunity. Second, the two policies are not remotely equivalent in terms of importance or relevance to what's going on in our country right now. When we talk about providing federal aid so the states don't have to cut essential services, we're talking about saving lives and we're talking about saving jobs. We're talking about boosting the economy. According to the Congressional Budget Office, money for state and local government creates the best bang for the buck for the economy from any spending Congress is considering. State and local aid is a policy with a nationwide reach. It would solve a real, immediate problem. On the other hand, when Republicans talk about giving corporate indemnity, they're talking about a solution in search of a problem. To date, there have been only 20 some odd personal injury lawsuits filed in the entire country. The bottom line is, one provision solves a real problem in our country. The other does not. The two sides are not remotely equivalent, and it's not a trade that makes any sense in terms of the well-being of the American people. Now, I know the Republican leader and Senate Republicans want to help small businesses and re-up the popular PPP to help prevent businesses from folding and American workers from being laid off. So do I. So do Democrats. Well, guess what? State and local relief is also about American workers getting laid off, too. If you want PPP, so small businesses don't lay off people, why wouldn't you want state and local aid so governments don't lay off people? They're the same people who need to feed their families, pay their rent, pay their mortgage, and get on with life. State and local relief is about American workers getting laid off. It's about firefighters getting laid off. It's about first responders getting laid off. It's about teachers getting laid off, bus drivers, sanitation workers, essential employees, men and women who have been working since the pandemic began and risking their lives to keep our country moving. It's impossible to imagine any community in this country functioning without them. And this morning, we learned that an additional 1.4 million Americans filed new unemployment claims, a huge spike from the previous week. If you want to save jobs, if you want to make sure those numbers don't go up, we need PPP for small business, and we need state and local aid for our governments, because both aid those entities and prevent people from being laid off and unemployment from going up. The liability provisions of the leader have nothing to do with that, and in fact only affect a very small number of lawsuits. So, if we're going to be here on the floor and talking about saving jobs, we have to talk about saving the essential jobs of essential public employees. They deserve our help too. They're no different than anyone else, whether they're in a red state or a blue state. And make no mistake, right now there's one person, just one person, standing in the way, and that is Leader McConnell. Now on another matter. Despite the fact that the presidential election ended well over a month ago, and that by now every single state in the country and the District of Columbia have certified results, there are still many on the political right who refuse to accept reality. Today, amazingly enough, 17 Republican attorneys general will meet with President Trump to discuss their desperate and wildly irresponsible lawsuit, which aims to literally overturn the will of the people on the grounds they didn't like the results. This has gone beyond ridiculous. No court in this country has found any of President Trump's claims of widespread voter fraud credible. No serious state election official, Democrat and Republican, has found them credible. Even the Trump administration's Justice Department, so browbeaten into political activities over the past 4 years, has not found a scrap of evidence that would affect the final result. And yet, rather than accept the simple truth that Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States, there are actually sitting senators and Congress members who'd prefer to undermine our democracy by indulging President Trump's wild conspiracy theories about a stolen election. Here in the Senate, the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee announced yesterday that next week he'll convene a hearing on, quote, election irregularities. When is this nonsense, detrimental to our democracy, going to end? When? It's already deeply irresponsible for my Republican colleagues, many of them, to stay silent about President Trump's deliberate attempts to poison Americans' faith in our elections. It's deeply irresponsible that there hasn't been a full-throated defense of the validity of our elections by Republican senators and the Republican leader, who still refuse to call Joe Biden president-elect. But to go one step further and use a Senate committee as a platform to spread misinformation about our own elections, it's beyond the pale. So in conclusion, Chairman Johnson should call off this ridiculous charade of a Senate hearing immediately. And if he won't, Leader McConnell should intervene to ensure that the committee does not indulge such quackery and conspiracy theories. And he should acknowledge the results of the election and make clear it's time to move on, just as he was happy to do so when the shoe was on the other foot. Doing otherwise would add fuel to the fire that's undermining faith in our wonderful democracy. And finally, just a note, I too want to bid a fond farewell to the senator from Kansas, a wonderful guy and a great guy. I learned how good he was when we met on the basketball courts in the House. He set the best picks of anybody. He'd quietly sneak up on you. You'd be dribbling or moving, and boom! He knows. But as good as he was at picks, he was very fine at legislating, and he's just a fine human being who I think just about every member on this side of the aisle will very much miss. So, Patty, we wish you and your family the very, very best. I yield the floor.